Okay, now we are heading into the last leg of the nuts and bolts section of this course. We're going to be discussing neurotransmitters that are really important as giving us clues into the biological underpinnings and mechanisms of the mental disorders we are going to be looking at over the semester. So let us get right to our lecture outline. And from the beginning, I've been having trouble with my computer doing weird things, so hopefully we'll get through this. This first page, you can see I have listed the molecules that we're going to be talking about, and it comes in two different categories: neurotransmitters and then neuropeptides, which we won't be really spending much time on. The neuropeptides, looking ahead, do include endorphins, which you know are released to help the pain, and neuromodulators, which are important for modulating neuronal activity. We will be focusing, however, more on these neurotransmitters, which are categorized here in two separate groups. The first is amino acid neurotransmitters that include glutamate, glycine, GABA, which is an acronym, and we'll see that in a minute, and does end with A standing for acid, so you can kind of remember that. And aspartate, which is a very excitatory. We've got glutamate and aspartate are very excitatory. GABA we're going to learn about in a minute a little bit more in detail because it is very relevant to some of our disorders. The second class here is monoamine, again amine, neurotransmitters. And that group is subdivided once again based on the structure of the particular molecule. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to look at a diagram of a biochemical, and you have to identify it from that. No, don't worry about that. In a minute, there will be something I'll want you to identify, but it's going to be much simpler than that. So let's take a quick look at this before we move through the systems. The first is dopamine. For sure, you've heard about dopamine. We're going to be talking a lot about that. So I'm going to move on now just to get through this list. Norepinephrine and epinephrine, both are biochemicals that are released during the stress response, in response to a stressor or a challenge. And then we have, I told you it would do that, the indolamine. The only indolamine right now we're going to look at is serotonin. Serotonin, it's almost impossible to live in this culture and not have heard about serotonin because they talk about it on TV for the different drugs that they use for treating depression. And it is very much involved. It is not as simple as one might lead you to believe. So we will definitely be talking about serotonin. Then we have acetylcholine. And last of the neurotransmitters, and very often these are not even thought of as neurotransmitters, we have soluble gas neurotransmitters. The first, nitric oxide, not nitrous oxide, that's different. Nitric oxide. And I know actually I worked investigating this and its role in promoting the release of dopamine in the medial preoptic area of the hypothalamus in the male rat when I was doing my PhD work. So nitric oxide was kind of ignored for a long time. However, it started being recognized as a critical element in the release of dopamine specifically, but also it is released when brain tissue is damaged. And we need nitric oxide in a certain level, at a certain level for normal brain functioning, but too much kills brain cells. And they have learned that one of the things that happens during a stroke is the release of excess nitric oxide. So if we can control that, it helps prevent some of the damage that could potentially be done by that stroke. And the other is carbon monoxide. We're not even going to be talking about that at all in relation to any of our mental disorders. So here we're going to start the systems. And what you need to know about each of these neurotransmitter systems is right here. It's listed. Serotonin, think about diffuse. It needs to move around your brain, and it is very modulatory. It modulates a lot of different neurotransmitters, brain function. And the cell bodies live in the Raphe nucleus. There's two of them, there's rostral and caudal. But no, they arise, these cell bodies arise from the Raphe nucleus. That's where they live. But then they project and they go to all levels of the CNS, which, think about it, if it's a modulatory system, that's probably a really good thing. So it's very important in the regulation of mood. So if we take a look at this diagram, you can see that it is found here in, these are cell bodies, just trying to point this out so that you know. And then we're moving to dopamine. There are 4 systems. Lots of times people only mention 2 or 3. They combine a couple of them and they forget about the tuberoinfundibular system. But this first system is a nigrostriatal system. The cell bodies in this dopamine system live in the substantia nigra. That's why you have this first part of the name of the system, substantia nigra, of the midbrain, and project to the striatum, which includes the caudate nucleus, putamen, and globus pallidus, which, as you know, I kept really hinging on that caudate nucleus in the last lecture or so. Couldn't get past that one. Anyway, so there they are. Those are the 3 structures that I listed as being part of the basal ganglia collection of structures, but it is also the striatum. It's kind of, the striatum's kind of like that area, okay? And this system is really concerned with sensory stimuli and movement. Think movement a lot. The mesolimbic system is the second one here, find my cursor. And think again, let me back up a minute. Nigrostriatal, the beginning of it is where the cell bodies live. The striatal stands for striatum, where the projections go. It's the same thing here with the mesolimbic system. We see meso, it's from the ventral tegmental system in the mesencephalon area, projecting to limbic structures. Okay, remember, limbic structures all have to do with things like emotion and reward. So very important. Again, this is an overview. We'll be detailing these a little bit more as we move through the disorders. Mesocortical system, again, starting from the ventral tegmental area, okay, and I should have said area instead of system, so don't let me goof you up there, to the frontal cortical regions associated with cognition and also reward. Now, sometimes you will see these 2 systems combined, mesocortical limbic system, but they truly are somewhat independent, although they work in concert, okay? And finally, last but not least, is this little itty bitty dopamine system called the tuberoinfundibular system. And this area is right down by the pituitary gland. It's concerned with the neuronal control of the hypothalamic, pituitary, endocrine system. And I am definitely going to have to correct a few of these words, but they're there, they're just not spelled very well. And if we look at where these dopamine systems live, you can see the cell bodies in that cluster, that little purple area right in here. And you can see how there are different projections. This would be mesocortical. This is nigrostriatal, mesolimbic, okay? We get down and we see this little itty bitty baby tuberoinfundibular system. So that's what we're gonna, let me also talk about dopamine in terms of being the reward neurotransmitter. Dopamine is that neurotransmitter that is like, oh, that's great, do more, dopamine, 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 dopamine. And remember, that's its personality. If we back up to serotonin, I'd like to make a comment about that personality. Serotonin is generally kind of like that molecule. It's like, oh yeah, this is like a fuzzy blanket. I feel pretty comfortable right now. Yeah, everything, yeah, pretty good. Okay, this is great. Serotonin, okay? Dopamine, 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 come on, come on, come on, let's go, let's do that again. Oh, I love that, love it, love it, okay? Now, let's go to our next little system, and it's really not little at all. Norepinephrine system also would be called the noradrenergic system. You have a small cluster of neurons that live in the locus coeruleus. So you can see these. Now, don't get confused. Whoops, don't get confused. Shoot. Sorry, I'm going to take you back because there's no way I'm going to do all that over again. And I apologize a million times. I'm going to have to save up my pennies. Oh boy. And save up my pennies and get a new laptop. That is all there is about it. So norepinephrine, noradrenergic. And look, because I'm not even going to touch the keys for a minute because it's going to do its own thing. Projects to areas of the CNS, central nervous system, including the spinal cord, the cerebellum, the thalamus, and the cerebral cortex. And again, as I mentioned before, it's very important in sympathetic nervous system activity. Now, I want you to pay attention to the fact that there are some cell bodies in the caudal raphe nuclei, but primarily we're looking at the locus coeruleus, which is up higher. So don't get this mixed up, okay, with serotonin. Next, glutamate. Glutamate excitatory, I already mentioned that. There are cortical pathways, meaning that they move from one part of the cortex to the other, but also between the thalamus and the cortex. There is another pathway called the extrapyramidal pathway, and that includes projections that go from the cortex to the striatum. Remember, the striatum was important in the nigrostriatal dopamine system, okay, as a reminder. And other glutamate projections exist between the cortex, the substantia nigra, the subthalamic nucleus, and the pallidum or pallidus, globus pallidus. Now, glutamate is really important for mental activity and for neurotransmission to occur. That's why, first off, you see a lot here in the listing of glutamate in the cortex. Okay, and taking information and using it and sending it on, but it is excitatory. Glutamate, 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 says, oh, okay, it's running all over these excitatory, go glutamate, 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 glutamate. Way different from serotonin, and we're going to see even more different from another neurotransmitter in a moment. Again, highly important in mental activity. So if you have excess glutamate activity, I just want you now to start thinking about what that could mean in terms of behavioral effects. Okay, so far we have serotonin, relaxed, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. Oh man, that's great. I want to do it again. Give me more. Okay, reward and motivation, motivation and reward. And then we get to glutamate. Glutamate, glutamate, glutamate. I'm so excited. I'm just running around all over. I'm excitatory. Okay, now let's go on to our next system, which is acetylcholine, cholinergic. I had to pull a different diagram out of a different source for this. Acetylcholine, I talk a little bit more about in the Fundamentals of Human Neuropsychology course. There will be a couple of points, though, in this particular class, and it's important for you to be aware of it anyway. It originates in a place called medial, towards the midline, remember? Septal nuclei, cluster of cell bodies, and a place called the basal nucleus of Maynard. For me, that name sounds funny to me, so it's always easy for me to remember. And projects to the cerebral cortex and the hippocampus. Now remember, what is the hippocampus important for? Memory, okay? That's one of its functions. That's it. It is the big guy in memory. Another system, which is pontomesencephalic tegmental, and I will not ask you to say that in an oral exam or anything. Complex, projects to the thalamus and parts of the forebrain. So you can see a lot of activity in the cortex and so forth. So just kind of take a look at these. You can study these when it comes time that you need them. And next, GABA. You will see I have a little extra here in the GABA. The diagram is coming up on the next slide, but GABA is gamma aminobutyric acid. You can call it GABA for the purposes of this class, but it does have a real official longer name from which it gets its acronym. It is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. We see GABAergic inhibition at all levels of the CNS, meaning it calms things, it slows neuronal firing, calms some things down. Sometimes that's really important. Other times it might be not the best thing to happen. So again, we're going to be talking about this in the context of mental disorders as we proceed through the course. It projects, this is just some of the places, but what I want you to be particularly aware of: hypothalamus, hippocampus, cerebral cortex, huge, huge, huge. Think about that, and cerebellar cortex. So the cerebellum as well. And here, I want to show you this picture of the actual GABA A receptor. There are GABA A receptors, GABA B receptors. But the one thing I really want to point out, and I'm trying very hard to get my laptop to cooperate with me here, is that you have subunits. You have alpha and beta and one gamma subunit, 2, 2, and 1. And if you have two molecules of GABA, the neurotransmitter GABA, binding to the alpha subunits. I'm trying to say that slowly so that it, kind of hopefully makes sense. It will activate that receptor. Once that receptor is activated, it allows negatively charged ions into the cytoplasm. That would not be sodium, right? Okay, I just want you to think of chloride as a negatively charged ion, right? And that will result in hyperpolarization, making the difference in polarity greater, making the inside of the neuron more negative than it was before in comparison to the outside of the neuron. And I want to point out specifically that there are different types of binding sites on this complex. Benzodiazepines binding site. There are other sites that include one picrotoxin, which you don't hear that. Barbiturates can actually be bound by this particular receptor, and a lot of other things that if you do them together, it increases the activity of the GABA to the point where it slows neuronal firing so much that it stops. So you can imagine why that's important. Maybe I'll try to, excuse me, find another diagram that shows a few more of those particular binding sites. So here is that same kind of diagram I have for the other neurotransmitters. You can see these areas where the cell bodies reside, and you can see how there is an awful lot of projections here. There's projections up here into the cortex and here to the nucleus accumbens, okay? So generally speaking, these are the systems and what I need you to know for this particular class. Certainly not complete. There's a lot more I could do with it, but for the purposes of this course, if you can grasp the personalities. Oh yes, I forgot to give you GABA's personality. All right, I told you where, okay, let's start with glutamate. Glutamate, it's so excitatory, it's running around, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And then there is dopamine. Ah, yeah, I'm motivated to do this. This is rewarding, dopamine, dopamine. And then there is serotonin. Oh, this is really comfortable. I'm really, yeah, this is good. Oh, serotonin. Now, let's move on to GABA. GABA is beyond serotonin in relaxation terms. GABA is GABA. Oh, GABA. I am really relaxed. Got the idea? So we go all the way from that little shrieky, high-pitched glutamate down to the very super relaxed, not going to get up anytime soon GABA. Hopefully this video lecture has helped bring some of these neurotransmitters to life for you. You have what you need to identify the pathways, and you should be able to do that at some point. And as we move into the written exam on, hint, hint. And hopefully all this ties together a little bit, and I am happy to have a review session as we approach our exams later on, and help you clarify anything that might be still confusing. So thank you, and hang in there. Talk again soon.